Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Multiple teams are requesting that the stewards reopen their investigations into the most recent weekend's controversy with regard to the lack of penalties for Verstappen and in part Sergio Perez. Some team bosses have even gone so far to say this is a scandal and that Red Bull straight up get away with things that other teams and drivers do not. Is this true? Will anything change as a result of this? Norris and also Hamilton give their thoughts on the matter. Very much intrigued to your perspective in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Now firstly, Hamilton and Vettel, bit of a reunion here for the B thing that they're doing. There's also this incredible helmet that Hamilton is rocking with this weekend. Daft Punk vibes for sure. And I mean, yeah, what do we think about this? I'm almost sure that he can't use this yellow light while he's on the track, no? Like, surely there's no way this is allowed to be on at the time. Imagine there was some way that whenever he, I don't know, when he put DRS on, this lit up. It would be fantastic. But yeah, this is the lid that Hamilton is rocking this weekend. It's pretty spectacular, I've got to say. And, well, it probably looks better before it's on when they've got this light on the visor, but nonetheless, it is pretty stunning. There's also some drama with AlphaTauri right now, and for good reason. Ricciardo, we think, is going to be staying, which is not necessarily a bad decision, and Yuki Tsunoda saying is also very viable, but the fact that Liam Lawson will likely not have a seat next year, especially with Williams expected to keep Sargent, is suboptimal, I think, for Red Bull. And even Lawson has commented on this and says, I would definitely not be happy about falling back into the reserve role because I know how hard it is to get into Formula 1. So, yeah, Lawson, I'm sure, feels like he's probably earned a seat, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Ricciardo, they probably want for a couple of reasons. Even Yuki Tsunoda said that Ricciardo gives such great feedback on the car in terms of development and stuff like this that other drivers can't. And he's done a Ricciardo, so that definitely helps when it comes to bringing in the sponsors. Red Bull are also going to test out the new floor again this weekend. They trialled it in Singapore, but they had so many other issues, they kind of just had to discard it and say, all right, we'll come back to it next time out. So, yeah, this new floor will get run this weekend in Japan. But even Perez is saying they're not fully sure what went wrong last weekend, at least according to Perez. Red Bull don't fully understand their issues, and there is some optimism from the other teams. They, again, won't be as quick. Now, Hamilton, as you'd think, would expect the Red Bull to be mighty around Japan. And as he says, he's expecting them to be phenomenal. But he also mentions, which is interesting just to see what happens on Sunday compared to this comment from Hamilton, if they're not 30 seconds ahead like they've done in the past, then something is up. So basically what he's saying is, if Max doesn't win by 30 seconds, the technical directive has affected them. It's kind of what to say. Now, you know, if it rains or if there's a safety car, then it affects that distance. But Max did say that he wants to win this race by at least 20 seconds. So we'll see, because he won it by plenty of distance last year, and it wasn't a full race distance because of the red flag due to the rain. So, yeah, this is what Hamilton reckons, and it'll be interesting to see, because the Red Bulls should be ridiculously good around here, and if it is again, then probably the TD hasn't done much for them. But if they are significantly slower, or if they win by 15 seconds and not 30, maybe there's something in it. But the big drama on Red Bull once again comes back to the events of last weekend on the Saturday during qualifying in Singapore. Teams are demanding an explanation. Now, we saw a couple of days ago, there were a couple of team bosses that have said, that was a little bit strange. Are the stewards unbiased on this? But now, having got to Japan, the teams are all over this, you know, because a lot of these teams have been affected by these penalties. And yet Red Bull seem to just get away with it, right, in Singapore. And as they say, they're demanding an explanation from the FIA as to why there are these double standards, calling for these cases to be reopened. I'm not sure what they do in hindsight, because if he started P11, they're not going to rerun the race with Verstappen starting P14. So I'm not really sure what would be happening unless there's further fines or penalties they might impose. The ruling is not uniform. The guidelines are always interpreted differently. You never know what applies. In addition, many engineers have come to the conclusion that some drivers or teams get a slap on the wrist more often than others. And Perez's incident with Albon in the race was an interesting example where Perez just snapped him out of the way. Like, if there's 5 seconds for Hamilton on Piastri, I think you can argue whether he should have got more, but I think that was kind of a clumsy move that was justified in terms of a penalty. But this from Perez was far more than just a clumsy move, apparently still 5 seconds. So some teams are saying, are you sure about this? We saw this, of course, instant. This is the Tsunoda getting impeded here by Max Verstappen during the qualifying session. this was a slam dunk case. He was on a flying lap. Verstappen was on the racing line. Verstappen thought he was getting a penalty. I think Red Bull thought they were getting a penalty. Tsunoda, I'm sure, thought that Max was getting a penalty for this, as did the other teams. And there's been plenty of penalties given out for very similar incidents so far this season. Max, though, got away with it. Was that because it was AlphaTauri, the sister team, that didn't send a representative? But why should that matter? Surely the stewards aren't stupid. They can look at the incident and say, well, that ticks the boxes. That's a 3-place penalty. That's how it works. That's not what happened, of course. And one team boss, this is from AMUS, very reliable information source on this one, and they put out this article today where one team boss, now we don't know which team boss, we can maybe guess, but one team boss has said that this is a scandal, right, in terms of the way that Max got treated compared to the way the rest of the grid got treated. And as I said the other day, is this, do we want to explain by malice or malpractice what can more easily be explained by incompetence? And that's an interesting debate to have. But as one of the other sports directors for the team says, the judgment is not uniform, you never know what applies, and yeah, Verstappen himself expected a grid penalty. Williams, I think also Sargent had another impeding incident on, was it Stroll or was it Alonso? And, I also think that the Aston Martin guys didn't turn up, but then they did slightly later, so it's always interesting. But I think the issue was that the FIA didn't invite AlphaTauri to attend, but yet they still could have attended, and it shouldn't really matter, should it, really, what the opposition has to say on this. If it's a penalty, it's a penalty. And this is the thing. It's not just the Tsunoda one as well, actually, but the Tsunoda one was probably the one that people are saying, like, many observers had more trouble with Tsunoda's obstruction. The Japanese made it clear on the radio what he thought with a few swear words, as he always does. Red Bull, relieved as driver. He was told too late that Tsunoda was approaching. But, and several team managers complained. Our drivers would have received a starting grid penalty for that incident, shall we say. But Verstappen didn't. Is this bias from the stewards? Is this mere incompetence and inconsistency? It's kind of difficult to say, because it does feel like in the last couple of years, especially at the end of 2021, Verstappen got away with some pretty outrageous stuff. And, today, we saw what happened last time out in Singapore, and people, will put 2 and 2 together. Whether, as I say, whether it's just incompetence, I don't know, but it's one of the two. It's either bias or it's incompetence. And there's also the pit lane drama, because Verstappen stopped to the end of the pit lane for, initially the number I heard was 18 seconds, then someone said 14 seconds, now AMUS say it's 18 seconds again, and he got away with this as well, for sitting at the end of the pit lane, which you're definitely not allowed to do, but the steward said, well, it didn't matter because everyone got caught up in traffic anyway, so the consequences weren't really massive. But, I don't think it should be about the consequences, really. It should be the intent or just the incident itself. And then an engineer says, well, that excuse from the FIA and the stewards to not give a penalty doesn't add up because, you can't make that calculation. The drivers are sent out of the garages according to a certain time. The current traffic will be there on the track, the time required for the warm-up, unforeseen incidents such as going to the weighbridge. If 18 seconds are suddenly added, the entire timing is no longer correct. So he's basically saying that just because the drivers kind of ended up in traffic, it doesn't mean that this wasn't harmful to those guys that got stuck behind Verstappen, which I'm pretty sure was the 2 Mercedes boys. So, maybe it's Toto Wolff that said it's a scandal. I don't know. But there was further reaction as well by some other people. I mean, there was quotes saying that Red Bull are always getting away with this stuff. The team, one of these team bosses spoke of it being a scandal. So, yeah, I don't know. And some of the drivers were doubling down on this as well. Hamilton was asked the question, and, well, Perez firstly said, I have nothing to say. I have no comment on the matter. Hamilton's like, are you sure? Thought you always had an opinion on this type of stuff. Perez refuses to comment and, eventually says, are you allowed to park at the end of the pit lane on the way out? And Perez is like, well, not wait for that long, but I think that's something in the future that we might be able to do now. And Hamilton's like, I genuinely didn't know. I didn't really see them, but we've got to work with the stewards to ensure we've got consistency. And it doesn't feel like at the moment there is that much consistency. Even Lando Norris, good boys with Verstappen, let's not forget, says, I don't want to say too much because it'll create controversy. but that should have been a penalty. He blocked someone. It's not just down to the team. I know the team got the fine, but it should be down to the driver as well to look in the mirrors. You've got nothing else to do the whole lap, but look in your mirrors. It seems like a lot of people struggle to do that. So kind of roasting his boy Verstappen, really. I think it should be just harsher penalties for blocking because so many people do it. It ruins your lap, ruins your quali. It put Yuki out of quali and he was P1 in Q1. No one seems to care enough, and it's happened a lot this year. It happened to me quite a few times, especially with certain teams, but it's also down to look in the mirror. I think Sainz has done a lot of blocking this year that sometimes has gone unpunished, and I don't know how many times Max has got in Norris's way, but they've got nothing else to do but hit the recharge button and look in the mirror. People seem to struggle with it in Formula 1, which is a surprise, and then he says, I'll probably block someone now this weekend and make myself look stupid, but still, I mean, if Lando's going to come out and say Max should have got a penalty, and, you know, they're two of the tightest knit guys in the paddock, and, you know, Leclerc also said the same thing. So they're saying just straight up harsher penalties, and some teams are saying it's rigged, it's bias, it's inconsistency deliberately to favour one driver and one team. And given recent events, you can see why teams think that way, especially given that Red Bull are winning anything anyway. So people are like, well, you know, they can't just be winning everything and also getting away with some of these incidents. So the FIA is also doing one other thing this weekend, which we saw this in Monza, where there was a maximum time limit for the teams and the drivers to get around the track. Now, Sainz and Leclerc both breached that time limit, but in Monza, but they got away with it, right? It was kind of controversial, but I think the rule isn't exactly hard and fast. Just one final thing to close out with was Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't often swear, really, but he's clearly been very frustrated with his performance in qualifying over, especially this season, but last season as well. He says, but qualifying's been terrible, filling in the blank for the last 2 years. That has to change. I'm being direct. Terrible. Far below average. That needs to change. So, you know, this just shows how much hunger Hamilton still has, because I think he's being a little bit harsh on himself here. His qualifying the last 2 years has been not Hamilton-esque in terms of when Hamilton was at his absolute peak, let's say 2018 or something. You know, his qualifying laps were mesmerising, and frankly, his most impressive record might be his 104 pole positions. I mean, that is truly incredible, and is no doubt one of the greatest qualifiers in the sport's history. So, you know, is he being harsh on himself to say that he's been awful in qualifying? Maybe, yes, and he is 20-17 against George in the last 2 years, which against Mr. Saturday, against one of the best qualifiers on the grid in George Russell, is still pretty impressive. Like, that's not, you know, that's not terrible, but, you know, maybe Hamilton doesn't think that highly of George and he thinks that it is terrible to be 20-17 against him, which is kind of funny to think about. But I think it just does show the, you know, the passion and the hunger that Hamilton has, and also that he does feel like that's a big weakness. And definitely after Singapore, he said, look, you know, he feels like he could have won that race had he been starting higher up. And there is now, you know, it's a big point for Mercedes that if you're starting P5, not P2, that's a really big deal, especially on a weekend where the Red Bulls were nowhere. That was Hamilton's chance. And, you know, he wasn't really complaining that Russell was in his way at the end of the race. You know, obviously Hamilton's a better racer than Russell is, but Hamilton just has to qualify ahead if he wants to ensure that he gets the preferential strategy from Mercedes, which he's currently struggling to achieve. So interesting to see exactly why he doesn't quite have the confidence in the car that he's previously had, because he's still got the pace, at least in race conditions. He's absolutely got the pace. Maybe he's lost a little bit of an edge in qualifying, but you know, maybe he can find that back somehow. And yeah, it's his absolute maximum focus, it feels right now, to get back to form. But that's all there is to it for now. Tomorrow is practice, and then we go from there. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.